While I was fighting for my life in the hospital, my parents left me alone. My boss fired me over text and gave my promotion to his nephew. When I confronted him, he said, "You should have died, would have been easier." Days later, I showed up to the company gala with a new investor. I wasn't someone who ever coasted. Every inch I'd gained in my career, I earned with late nights, weekend calls, missed birthdays, and coffee-fueled client pitches. Crestwood and Gray wasn't my dream firm, but it had become home. I started there at 25 as an assistant, working under a man named Malcolm Kavanagh, who was smart, charming, and always knew who to flatter to stay ahead. He wasn't outright cruel, at least not then. Just the kind of boss who'd use your work and take the credit. I was good at what I did, great, even. That was my shield for years. I kept my head down, worked hard, and when a director role opened up, Malcolm told me I was the natural choice. "You've earned this, Brenna," he said in front of half the team. That was the spring before the accident. By summer, it still hadn't happened. "We're restructuring," he'd say. "Let's talk next quarter." And then, September. I took a solo drive to Mount Rainier. Hiking had always helped clear the fog in my mind. But the fog on the mountain roads that day wasn't metaphorical. A deer jumped into the road. I swerved, my car clipped a guardrail, and all I remember next was a flurry of white and a spinning blur. Waking up in the ICU felt like surfacing from a long, dark tunnel. My body felt foreign. Ribs taped up, left leg braced, fingers bandaged. A nurse was adjusting my fore when I opened my eyes. "You're lucky," she said. It could have been worse. I wanted to believe her. What came next was a cascade of quiet betrayals. The kind you never expect, especially when you're already laid flat. I texted my mom the next day. I told her what happened. She responded with "Oh no. Get well soon," and nothing else. Not even a phone call. My dad's response? A thumbs up emoji. Neither visited. Days passed, then a week. My coworkers? Silence. Except one name that showed up on my phone, Malcolm. It wasn't a check-in. Not a get-well message. It was a long text, cold and careful. "Hey Brenna, sorry to hear about the accident. We had to make a quick call on the riverfront pitch and Jared stepped up. Also, given the budget cutbacks and pending merger, we had to restructure. Your position is being dissolved. Best wishes with your recovery." I read it 5 times before I could breathe. Jared. His nephew. He had less than 2 years of experience. Couldn't run a meeting without stammering. I was still on morphine when I asked the nurse to help me sit up so I could throw up. Franklin, the night nurse who worked the post-surgical floor, became the one human who saw me unravel. I didn't talk much, but he picked up on things. The way I flinched at phone alerts. How I didn't eat when no one visited. He never pried. Just brought extra tea and sometimes sat by the window when my nights were long. When I was discharged, I had no one to pick me up. He pulled a few strings to get me transport home. Back in my apartment, quiet, sterile, barely touched in weeks, I made a vow. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to spiral. I was going to build a timeline. A record. Proof. Every pitch deck I'd created. Client emails. Meetings I led. Contracts I negotiated. I printed everything. Labeled files. Backed up hard drives. All while moving between a walker and a cane, and icing my ribs between scans. One morning, I remembered someone, Susan Crestwood. The co-founder of the firm. She had retired years ago, but I met her at a design expo in Vancouver back in 2019. She liked me. We'd talked for over an hour about sustainable spaces and Scandinavian design. I remembered how her eyes lit up when I told her I grew up sketching buildings instead of dolls. I found her email. Wrote a message. Nothing desperate. Just the facts. I didn't expect a reply. She responded in 36 minutes. We met at the crumpet shop downtown, in the corner booth where the sun hit just right. She was older now, moved slowly, but when she looked at me, I could tell she hadn't lost her fire. She listened. Didn't interrupt once. When I finished telling her everything, Malcolm, the text, the accident, what he said to my face at our meeting when I asked for a formal exit interview, she sat quietly for a minute. Then she said, "He told you, you should have died?" I nodded. "Cowards always say the quiet part out loud when they think they've won," she said. She asked for all my documentation. I gave it to her. That was it. I went home. Waited. I didn't expect what came next. A legal team emailed me the following week asking for a meeting. Susan wanted me to consult. Quietly. Off the books at first. She still held 30% of the company. Jared had flubbed the riverfront pitch so badly the client pulled their proposal. Malcolm had been covering for him. There were emails. Budget misuses. Nepotism. Things even I hadn't known. Then came the gala. Crestwood and Gray's biggest event. Black tie. Glitzy. Invitations sent to every investor, client, and senior employee. I had deleted mine when it first arrived. But Susan told me to come. "Wear something that makes you feel powerful," she said. I stepped into the ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel a little past 8. Alone. Hair swept up. I wasn't walking perfectly yet, but my cane matched the heels. I saw Malcolm across the room with a scotch in hand. He did a double take when he spotted me. I watched his eyes narrow into that smug little smirk I'd come to know too well. He leaned toward Jared and whispered something. Jared laughed. The music lowered. Susan took the mic. And in front of 200 people, she announced a board restructuring. She mentioned corporate values, company culture, and accountability. Then she introduced me. "Please welcome the firm's new board consultant and special advisor to the Executive Restructuring Committee, Brenna Wills." Gasps. Applause. Confusion. Malcolm didn't clap. Jared looked like he wanted to disappear into his cheap cologne. I didn't even look at them when I stepped up beside Susan. She held my hand up like a fighter who just won a title. The gala night felt like a fever dream I never expected to live through. I don't remember much about the rest of the evening after Susan made the announcement. People came up to shake my hand, some with genuine warmth, others with the kind of fake politeness that clings to corporate spaces like wallpaper, elegant, but flat. Malcolm avoided me the rest of the night, but I saw his expression shift throughout the evening. Anger. Confusion. And something close to fear. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw barbs or make a scene. I just stood where I belonged and let my presence do the talking. Jared left early. The next day, I received an email from HR saying that effective immediately, Malcolm had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal audit. Jared's contract had already been terminated. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious, at least not in the way I expected to. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like finally breathing after being underwater too long. The days that followed were a blur of meetings. I worked closely with the interim leadership team to implement changes, employee wellness reviews, unbiased promotion paths, and most importantly, whistleblower protections. There were people still inside Crestwood and Gray who had stayed quiet for years out of fear of retaliation. They were now stepping forward with things that made my stomach turn. Apparently, my case was far from unique. I was just the one that got loud. Around that same time, my phone started lighting up with names I hadn't seen in months. My mother texted first. "Saw something about a big promotion. Congratulations. You always were the ambitious one." No mention of the hospital. No apology. Just an attempt to re-enter the narrative like she hadn't ghosted me in my most vulnerable moment. I left it on read. 3 days later, she called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was airy, the same tone she used to use when she talked to yoga instructors and Whole Foods cashiers. "Brenna, honey, I know things have been complicated. But I'd love to reconnect. Maybe come up for the weekend?" As if I could just pop up to Bellevue and we'd pick up like nothing happened. My dad's message came through as a voice note, which was already a red flag. "Heard you made a splash at your work thing. Good for you. If you want to catch up, I'm still out near Spokane. You can bring that nurse you keep mentioning." I hadn't mentioned Franklin to him. Not once. That meant my dad had either stalked my social or talked to someone who had. I didn't respond to him either. Not yet. I'm not cold by nature. I wasn't raised to hold grudges. But there's something about being left alone in a hospital bed, wondering if you mattered enough for a phone call, that rearranges how you think about love. My friends, even the few who stayed distant during the worst parts, reached out after the gala. Some apologized for not being there. Others were honest, they didn't know how to show up when I was hurting. I respected that more than the fake cheer my parents were trying to push now. Franklin was still around. We hadn't labeled anything, but he came over most evenings. Brought dinner. Sometimes sat quietly while I answered emails or journaled. He didn't pressure. He didn't pretend to understand everything I'd been through. He just showed up. Consistently. One night I asked him, "Do you think I'm being too harsh on them? My parents?" He didn't answer right away. That's what I liked about him, he never filled silence with noise. After a long pause, he said, "There's a difference between boundaries and bitterness. You're not angry. You're just done pretending they were better than they were." That stuck with me. The strangest part was how many people in the office acted like nothing had happened. People who had stood by Malcolm, smiled in meetings while I was phased out, now suddenly wanted to grab coffee, talk strategy, pick my brain. I learned to smile politely and keep things surface level. The new COO, Trina, was someone I trusted. She had worked in the London branch for years and had only recently returned. She was blunt in a way that made me feel safe. In one meeting, after I outlined a policy proposal for promotion transparency, she said, "You know, it's going to make some people real uncomfortable." I shrugged. "Let them be." Trina grinned. "You've got the spine." I like that. Outside of work, I tried to find a new rhythm. I started going on shorter hikes again, slower, but steadier. My legs still twinged in the cold, and I couldn't run anymore, but I was walking. One evening, I stopped at a little viewpoint halfway up the Discovery Park Trail. The sky was burnt orange, bleeding into gray, and I felt this strange stillness inside me. Not peace. Not yet. But something close. That night, my phone buzzed with a photo, my dad, holding a "Congrats Brenna" cake, badly frosted, his new girlfriend smiling too wide behind him. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was touched. Because it was the first time he used my name on purpose in years. I haven't responded to them yet. I don't know if I will. What do you even say to people who only acknowledge your worth after the world does? They weren't there when I needed a hand to hold, or a voice to say, "I'm here." They were absent when I was too weak to stand. And now that I've risen, they want back in. I'm not angry. I'm not even sad. I'm just measuring the distance between blood and love. And wondering if it's worth closing that gap again. About 2 weeks after the gala, Susan asked me to speak on a panel at a regional architecture and development summit in Portland. It wasn't mandatory, but she made it clear she thought my presence would send a message, not just to the firm, but to the industry. I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't my favorite thing, especially when half the audience would be people who had either ignored me or helped push me out. But then I thought about what it would have meant, to that version of myself stuck in a hospital bed, wondering if the silence meant she didn't matter. That version would have begged for a seat at the table. So I said yes. The morning of the event, I stood in front of the hotel mirror smoothing down the lines of a charcoal gray dress that fit like armor. The scars on my leg were still visible, faint and patchy across my calf, but I didn't bother to cover them. They weren't flaws. They were receipts. Franklin texted, "Crush it today. I'll have dinner waiting. Unless you're too famous by then." I smiled for the first time that day. The panel was uneventful at first: corporate speak, safe answers, buzzwords. Then someone from the audience asked me a direct question: "How do you rebuild trust in a company that betrayed you?" Silence. Every panelist glanced my way like they hoped I'd take it so they didn't have to. I leaned into the mic. "You don't rebuild trust with apologies or empty slogans," I said. "You rebuild it by cleaning house. And then you make damn sure that the people who were once invisible get the first seat at the table." The room was quiet for a breath. Then came the applause. Not loud, but steady. A few people stood. Afterwards, a woman approached me. She was maybe mid-40s, with tired eyes and a strong grip when she shook my hand. "I worked under Malcolm too," she said softly. "In HR. I saw what they did to you." I wanted to say something. I didn't know how. I nodded. It's never too late. It wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. When I got back to Seattle, there was a voicemail from my mom. I hadn't spoken to her in 4 months, not since the accident. "Hi sweetheart, just wanted to say I watched your panel. You were so poised." I showed it to my friends. Everyone was really impressed. "I was thinking maybe we could go to that Thai place you used to like in Bellevue? If you're not too busy." Something in her tone irritated me, not because she reached out, but because she made it about her again. Her friends. Her pride. Her social standing. It reminded me of when I was a kid and won a regional essay contest. She came to the ceremony, took pictures, told me she was proud. But I overheard her on the phone later telling someone, "It's such a reflection of how I raised her, you know?" I never forgot that. It was never about me. It was always about how I made her look. I didn't call her back. I wasn't ready to give her the chance to make this part of my story about her, too. At work, things started to shift in subtle ways. People weren't tiptoeing around me anymore. Some asked me real questions, about recovery, about corporate culture, about speaking up. Others avoided me like I carried some contagion. But it didn't bother me. Trina started giving me more influence and decisions. Not because she felt obligated, but because I'd earned her respect. She saw me as an equal. That mattered more than any board title. One afternoon, she pulled me aside. "You ever think about staying on longer?" she asked. "We could use someone like you full-time." I hesitated. "Not ready to answer that," I said truthfully. "Fair enough. Just, don't disappear." It was a random Thursday when my dad showed up at my apartment. No warning. Just a knock. I looked through the peephole and there he was, weathered and uncomfortable, holding a takeout bag like a white flag. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Hi," he said. "What are you doing here?" "I was in town. Thought I'd see how you're doing." I let the silence stretch. He held up the bag. "Chicken pad thai. Your favorite." "You haven't known my favorite since I was 16, I said flatly. He lowered the bag, unsure. "I didn't know how to reach you," he said after a beat. "Your mom said you were shutting everyone out." I almost laughed. "I was in a hospital. You didn't call. You didn't check. I could have died, and you wouldn't have known until someone sent you a bill." He looked down. I didn't know what to say. "You could have said anything." We stood in silence for a long time. Then I opened the door a little wider. "You can come in. But only for one conversation." He stepped in slowly, like walking on eggshells. He didn't touch anything. "I know I screwed up," he said once we sat down. "I wasn't there when you needed me." "No," I said. "You weren't. And I'm not sure you get to fix that with noodles and a late visit." He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. I guess I came to say. I see you now. That hit something. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there. I'm not asking for a pass, he added. I just don't want to pretend I didn't fail you. That was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever gotten from either of my parents. I didn't forgive him, not right there. But I also didn't throw him out. We sat for a while, the silence thick but not angry. He left after an hour. I told him not to expect anything. He said okay. It's weird. After everything, hospital beds, betrayal, board meetings, voicemails, I feel more like myself than I have in years. But I'm still figuring out what to do with the broken parts. The pieces that don't quite fit anymore. The parts of me that want to let people in, and the parts that want to board every door shut. Franklin's still around. He doesn't push. He knows when to leave me be and when to lean in. Sometimes I wonder what it says about me that the man who showed me the most care during the worst time in my life wasn't my father, my mother, or even a friend, but a nurse I barely knew. But then again, maybe that's the point. Sometimes family shows up in the people who aren't bound by blood, but by empathy. 2 months after the Portland summit, Susan invited me to a quiet lunch at Canlis, one of those high-end places that practically whispers money from the napkin folds. She didn't do small talk, not really her style. After we sat down, she got right to it. I'm stepping back, she said. For good this time. Trina will take over day-to-day operations. But I want you to take my seat on the board. I stared at her, fork halfway to my mouth. You want me to replace you? She nodded. You're the only person I trust not to flinch when it matters. You've already earned more respect in 6 months than Malcolm did in a decade. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like something deeper, validation. Not just for me, but for every quiet person who ever worked themselves half to death in the shadow of someone louder and less capable. I accepted the offer. The first board meeting with me officially seated was surreal. It wasn't lost on me that I was now sitting in a room full of people who once viewed me as expendable. Now, they asked for my input before making major decisions. Malcolm wasn't there, of course. After the audit, he resigned with a carefully worded letter about new opportunities. Internally, we knew the truth: he'd buried the company in nepotism, favoritism, and bad faith. It wasn't criminal, just dirty. No jail time. Just professional exile. He had quietly tried to pitch a startup after leaving, but word had already spread about how he ran things. No investors touched it. Last I heard, he moved to Arizona and was doing consulting work for strip mall developers. Jared? Word was, he went back to school. Not in design. Not in business. He vanished from the industry entirely. There was no screaming match. No courtroom finale. Just a slow, grinding disassembly of everything they built on sand. A few weeks after I officially took Susan's place, Crestwood and Gray announced a new internal mentorship program. I was asked to lead it. I called it the Wills Initiative. Not to brand myself, but because I wanted every junior employee who walked through that door to know that someone like them could make it. That promotions didn't just go to family. That survival didn't have to mean silence. One of the first ments was a young woman named Maura, fresh out of school, smart as hell and painfully unsure of herself. She reminded me of me, 10 years ago. I made sure she got real projects. Real credit. Real feedback. The first time she stood up in front of a client and nailed the presentation, I sat in the back of the room and watched the partners nod. Afterward, she turned to me, wide-eyed. I didn't think I'd be allowed to do that yet. I smiled. You earned it. As for my parents, I met my mom for coffee. Once. She was nervous. Fidgety. Full of hollow compliments and veiled attempts at rewriting history. You know, I always believed in you, she said. I didn't argue. But I also didn't feed it. I don't need your belief, I said calmly. I needed your presence. And you weren't there. She didn't have an answer for that. We parted politely. I haven't seen her since. My dad sends texts every few weeks. Sometimes a meme. Sometimes a check-in. I don't ignore him, but I don't engage much either. There's no hatred. Just boundaries. A fence where a door used to be. Franklin and I never made things official in the traditional sense. But he's here. Consistently. On the mornings when I wake up with tightness in my chest, he's already in the kitchen boiling water for tea. I don't need him to rescue me. And he doesn't try. What we have is built on something rarer than drama, it's built on quiet. On showing up. Sometimes, people from the old office still message me. The ones who looked away, or stayed silent. Some ask if we can catch up. Others want to talk about what really happened. I respond to a few. Not to punish them, but to remind them that the system only changes when everyone stops playing along with it. It's not my job to fix the past. But it is my job to make sure the future looks nothing like it. Last week, Susan invited me over to her house in Medina. She'd had knee surgery and was recovering with her 2 massive golden retrievers sprawled across the living room. You ever feel like you won? She asked me, out of nowhere. I thought for a long time before answering. No, I said. But I feel like I stopped losing. And that's something. She grinned. That's everything. And here's the best part, last month, Crestwood and Gray closed a deal with one of the biggest sustainable housing developers in North America. A deal I brought in. One that Malcolm tried to land 5 years ago but blew because he underestimated the client's priorities. Turns out they remembered me from a forgotten email thread. Their lead executive said, "We were waiting for someone with vision." Looks like that someone finally showed up. We signed the deal at the Olympic Hotel. Same ballroom where Malcolm once smirked as I walked in on a cane. This time I stood tall, no cane in sight, in front of the same crowd, and announced the partnership myself. Applause filled the room. Not because I returned. But because I earned it.